The champagne flutes clinked together in our penthouse overlooking Manhattan, the amber liquid catching the afternoon light, filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. David raised his glass to mine, that familiar dimpled smile spreading across his face, the same smile that had captivated me 12 years ago when we met at a pharmaceutical conference in Boston. "To my brilliant wife," he announced, his voice warm with what I believed was pride. "To the woman who just changed our lives forever." I smiled back, exhausted but exhilarated, still processing that the wire transfer had cleared that morning. $17 million. My patent for a revolutionary drug delivery system that would make cancer treatment less invasive and more effective had finally sold to Biogen Pharmaceuticals after 3 grueling years of development, testing, and negotiations. I watched David move toward the bar cart, his movements fluid and practiced as he prepared to make another toast. We'd been celebrating since I'd gotten the call from my lawyer that morning, and my head was already swimming slightly from the earlier drinks. Through my euphoric haze, I noticed David's back was to me as he fiddled with something at the bar. When he turned around with a fresh glass of champagne for me, I caught something. Just a flash of his other hand slipping a small vial back into his pocket. The movement was so quick, so practiced, that for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. But then I saw his eyes, and they weren't filled with love or celebration. They were cold, calculating, and when they met mine, there was a flicker of something dark before he smoothed his expression back into that charming smile. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Time seemed to slow as he walked toward me with that glass, every step deliberate, every second stretching into eternity. My mind raced through possibilities, rejections, desperate attempts to convince myself I was being paranoid. But I'd spent the last 3 years working with compounds, studying molecular structures, understanding how substances interact with the human body. I knew what I'd seen. The small vial, the furtive movement, the way his hand had hovered over the glass, just a moment too long. And suddenly, with horrifying clarity, other moments from the past months crashed over me like a wave. His insistence that I update my will right after the patent deal was confirmed. The life insurance policy he'd suggested we increase, just to be safe now that we have real assets to protect. The way he'd been so solicitous lately, so attentive when he'd been distant and irritable for years. The mysterious calls he'd take in his car, the unexplained absences he'd blame on his consulting work. How had I been so blind? "Here you go, darling," David said, extending the glass toward me, his smile never wavering. My hand reached out automatically, years of trust and habit overriding the alarm bells screaming in my mind. Feeling its cool stem between my fingers, watching the bubbles rise in lazy spirals through the poison liquid. I lifted it toward my lips, seeing his eyes follow the movement with an intensity that confirmed every terrible suspicion, crystallizing in my mind. At the last possible second, I turned my head toward the window, as if distracted by something below. "Oh my God, is that an accident down there?" I exclaimed, moving toward the window. In the reflection, I watched David's face flash with irritation before he composed himself and joined me at the window. While his attention was diverted, I quickly switched our glasses, my heart hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. The maneuver took less than 3 seconds, executed with the same steady hands that had performed thousands of precise laboratory procedures. "I don't see anything," David said, scanning the street below. "You must be tired all this excitement." He turned back, reaching for his glass, the one that had been mine, and I felt a sick satisfaction watching him take a long drink without hesitation. I pretended to sip from mine, barely letting the liquid touch my lips. "You're right. I am exhausted," I said, my voice remarkably steady, considering I was watching my husband of 12 years drink what I was now certain was poison meant for me. "I think I need to lie down for a bit." His expression shifted to concern so genuine it would have fooled me completely if I hadn't seen what I'd seen. "Of course, sweetheart, you rest. I'll take care of everything." The way he said everything made my skin crawl. I nodded and headed toward our bedroom, feeling his eyes on my back, heavy with anticipation. He thought he was watching me walk toward my death. Instead, I was walking toward my revenge. Once in the bedroom, I didn't lie down. Instead, I locked the door quietly and immediately pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking as I opened the camera app. I needed evidence, needed time, needed to think. I called my best friend Rachel, a corporate lawyer who'd helped negotiate the patent deal. "Rachel," I whispered urgently when she answered, "I need you to listen very carefully and not say anything to alarm me in case someone's listening. David just tried to poison me." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Are you safe right now?" she asked, her voice instantly professional and controlled. For the moment, I switched the glasses. He drank it instead. "Jesus Christ, Meredith. You need to call 911 right now." "Not yet. I need to know what I'm dealing with first. Can you get to my research lab?" "There's a security camera in our living room. I set it up months ago when some documents went missing. Everything should be recorded on the cloud server. Access code is your birthday plus 4,747. I could hear Rachel typing rapidly. "I'm pulling it up now. Oh my God, Meredith. I can see it clear as day. He pulled something from his pocket and dumped it in your glass. This is attempted murder. You have him." But I was already thinking beyond simple prosecution. David had tried to kill me for my money, had calculated that my life was worth less than $17 million. He'd slept beside me, made love to me, shared meals with me, all while planning my murder. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. And then another realization hit me. If he was willing to kill me, what else had he done? "Rachel, I need you to do something else. Hire a private investigator, the best one you can find. I want to know everything about David's life for the past 2 years, everything. Bank accounts, phone records, travel history, Meredith, you should really let the police handle this. The police will arrest him. And then what? He'll get a lawyer, maybe claim it was a mistake, that he didn't know what was in that vial, that someone else put it there. Even if he's convicted, he'll be out in 15, maybe 20 years. That's not enough. I want him to lose everything, the way he tried to take everything from me. Can you do this for me or not?" There was a long pause before Rachel answered, "I can do it. But Meredith, be careful. If he realizes what you're doing, he won't. Because as far as he knows, I just drank poison. I'm going to collapse any minute now." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the bedroom mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with shock and adrenaline, but beneath that I could see something else emerging, a cold fury that burned with the intensity of a supernova. I'd spent 3 years of my life creating something that would help thousands of cancer patients. I'd sacrificed sleep, health, and time to make the world a better place. And my husband had decided that my greatest achievement was simply an opportunity for him to cash in by murdering me. I waited in that bedroom for 20 minutes, listening to David move around the penthouse. Then I heard him on the phone, his voice low but carrying through the door. "She's been in there for almost half an hour now. It should be working soon." "No, I'm sure. I used exactly what you said. Yes, the will is updated. I'm the sole beneficiary. We need to be careful with the timing. I'll call you back." Who was he talking to? An accomplice? A girlfriend? Both? My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Pi is on it. Also, I checked the compound registry at the toxicology lab. Based on the description and your husband's likely access points, I'm guessing it might be ricin or something similar. You need to get medical attention immediately." I texted back. He drank it, not me. How long do symptoms usually take? For Ryzen, several hours to days. But Meredith, you can't just let him die. That makes you guilty of murder. She was right, of course. As much as I wanted David to suffer for what he tried to do, I wasn't a killer. I was a scientist, a healer, someone who dedicated her life to saving lives. But I also wasn't going to let him get away with attempted murder. I emerged from the bedroom, deliberately making my movements slow and unsteady. David looked up from his laptop, and I saw the flash of anticipation in his eyes before he masked it with concern. "Darling, are you all right? You look pale." "I feel strange," I said, which wasn't a lie. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, married to a stranger who wore my husband's face. Dizzy in my stomach, I swayed dramatically, catching myself on the doorframe. David was on his feet immediately, moving toward me with what looked like concern but felt like a predator closing in on wounded prey. Let me help you to the couch. You want me to call a doctor? The audacity of it almost made me laugh. He wanted to call a doctor so there would be a record of him playing the concerned husband before I mysteriously died of natural causes, or maybe accidental poisoning. How long had he been planning this? No, no, doctor, I mumbled. Just need to rest. I let him guide me to the couch, his hands on my arms feeling like brands burning through my clothes. He settled me down with a blanket, brought me water that I pretended to sip, all the while playing the role of devoted husband. And I played the role of dying wife, getting progressively more ill as the afternoon wore into evening. My phone was hidden under the blanket, and I was texting furiously with Rachel. The private investigator had already uncovered a bombshell. David had a girlfriend named Sienna, a 28-year-old Instagram influencer he'd been seeing for 18 months. More importantly, he'd taken out a $3 million life insurance policy on me 6 months ago, right around the time my patent negotiations had gotten serious. The beneficiary was him, of course, but there was more. David had gambling debts totaling nearly $2 million owed to some very dangerous people. The patent money wasn't about greed. It was about survival. He'd gotten himself into a hole he couldn't climb out of, and I was his solution. He'd rather murder his wife than admit his failures and ask for help. How are you feeling now? David asked, his voice dripping with false concern as he sat beside me. I could see him checking his watch, comparing the timeline in his head to whatever he'd been told to expect. Worse, I whispered. David, I need to tell you something, in case something happens to me. I saw his eyes light up, eager to hear what he probably thought would be tearful declarations of love. I know everything, I said quietly, my voice suddenly clear and strong. I sat up, throwing off the blanket, and watched his face transform from confusion to shock to fear as he realized I wasn't dying. I know about Sienna. I know about your gambling debts. I know about the life insurance policy. And I know that you put poison in my drink tonight, thinking you could kill me and take everything I worked for. The color drained from David's face. Meredith, I don't know what you're talking about. You're not making sense. Maybe you should. The cameras, Dave. The penthouse has security cameras. I have you on video putting something in my glass. And here's the thing. I switched our glasses. You drank the poison, not me. I watched that information hit him like a physical blow. His hand immediately went to his stomach, fear flickering across his features. You're blaming me for your paranoid delusions. Rachel has the footage. The police are already analyzing it. I also have timestamps showing you purchased Ryzen from a dark web vendor 3 weeks ago. The pie was very thorough. That last part was a bluff. We didn't have that information yet, but his reaction told me everything I needed to know. His face went from red to white to gray in the space of seconds. You're lying. You can't prove any of this. Can't? Let's call your friend, the one you were talking to earlier about me, the one helping you plan this whole thing. Let's see what they have to say. David lunged at me, faster than I'd anticipated, his hands reaching for my throat. But I'd prepared for this possibility. I rolled away, and suddenly the bedroom door burst open. 2 police officers and Rachel emerged, having been waiting there the entire time I'd been resting. They'd heard everything through the phone I'd left on in my pocket. David Chambers, you're under arrest for attempted murder, one of the officers announced, pulling David's hands behind his back as he thrashed and protested. This is insane. She's crazy. She's trying to frame me. But even as he said it, I could see him starting to realize the full scope of what was happening. I'd outplayed him at his own game. The paramedics arrived moments later. Rachel had called them before the police, on my instruction. They immediately began treating David for poison exposure, pumping his stomach, starting Roo. He would survive. I'd made sure of that. I'd carefully researched which poisons he might have access to and had antidotes on hand. When I'd switched the glasses, I'd also added an emetic agent that would make him vomit up most of the poison before it could do serious damage. Because unlike him, I valued human life. Even his. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of police statements, investigations, and revelations that kept getting worse. The private investigator uncovered that Sienna wasn't just David's girlfriend. She was his accomplice. She'd been the one to suggest the poisoning, had connections to obtain the ricin, and had been promised a share of my life insurance payout and the patent money. They'd planned to wait a respectful 6 months after my death, then get married and move to the Cayman Islands. They'd even picked out a villa. David's gambling debts were tied to an illegal sports betting ring run by organized crime figures. He'd been desperate, panicked, and had seen my success as his salvation. If he could just get rid of me, the prosecution had an airtight case. The video evidence, the financial records, the text messages between David and Sienna, the traced purchase of the ricin, David's own phone call that the police had recorded. It all added up to premeditated murder. Even his expensive lawyers couldn't spin their way out of the mountain of evidence. But I wasn't satisfied with just the criminal prosecution. I wanted David to understand what he'd tried to take from me, to feel the full weight of his betrayal. So I used my $17 million, the money he'd tried to kill me for, to systematically dismantle the life he'd tried to build on my corpse. First, I sued him in civil court for fraud, emotional distress, and breach of fiduciary duty. Since we were married, half of my patent money was technically community property, but I argued, one, that his attempted murder invalidated any claim he had to my assets. The judge agreed, awarding me full ownership of everything and ordering David to pay damages. Not that he had anything left to pay with. Second, I bought out his gambling debts from the criminals he owed. This served two purposes. It eliminated the threat to him, because again, I wasn't a monster, but it also meant he owed me instead. I restructured the debt with maximum legal interest rates and ensured that every penny he ever made for the rest of his life would be garnished to repay it. He would spend decades in my debt, literally. Third, I went after Sienna. She thought she was clever, playing the innocent girlfriend who'd been manipulated by David. But the evidence showed she'd been the architect of much of the plan. She was charged as an accomplice to attempted murder, and I sued her separately for conspiracy and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her Instagram influencer career evaporated overnight when her followers learned she'd tried to help murder someone for money. Every sponsorship dropped her. Every brand partnership dissolved. Her account eventually deleted after the harassment became too intense. I didn't orchestrate that part. The internet has its own sense of justice. Fourth, and perhaps most satisfying, I used some of the patent money to establish a foundation for cancer patients and domestic violence survivors. I named it the Second Chances Foundation and made sure every article about it mentioned how I'd narrowly escaped my husband's murder plot. David's name became synonymous with betrayal and greed, while my name became associated with resilience and giving back. Every good deed I did with that money was a reminder of what he tried to take. The trial was a media sensation. The wronged scientist wife, the greedy gambling addict husband, the Instagram influencer accomplice, the poisoned champagne glass. It had everything the public loved. I sat in the courtroom every single day looking David in the eye as witness after witness destroyed any hope he had of acquittal. I wanted him to see me alive, thriving, strong. I wanted him to know that not only had he failed to kill me, but his attempt had made me powerful in ways he couldn't imagine. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud, David finally broke. He turned to look at me across the courtroom, and I saw not the man I'd married but a hollow shell, someone who'd gambled everything on a murderous scheme and lost it all. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison, without possibility of parole for 15 years. Sienna got 12 years as an accomplice. As they led him away in handcuffs, David tried one last time. "Meredith, please. I'm sorry. I was desperate. I made a mistake. A mistake." As if trying to murder your wife was equivalent to forgetting to buy milk at the store. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked past him without a word. I'd said everything I needed to say in my victim impact statement, where I'd described in detail what it felt like to watch your husband poison your drink, to realize that someone you loved had calculated that your death was worth more than your life. I'd let the world know that David Chambers was a man who'd looked at his brilliant, successful wife and seen only a bank account to plunder. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my foundation work and started developing a new patent, this one for an early detection system for certain types of cancers. I bought a new penthouse, couldn't stay in the one where he'd tried to kill me, and decorated exactly how I'd always wanted, without compromising for someone else's taste. I cut my hair short, started painting again, took a trip to Japan that I'd been putting off for years. I rediscovered who Meredith was when she wasn't defined by being David's wife, and it turned out I was pretty spectacular on my own. Rachel introduced me to her brother, Marcus, a marine biologist with kind eyes and a gentle sense of humor. We started as friends, both wary of relationships. Him because of a painful divorce, me for obvious reasons. But slowly, carefully, we built something real. Something based on mutual respect and genuine admiration, rather than the illusion of love that had masked David's calculating manipulation. Marcus knew my whole story. Everyone did after the trial, but he saw me as more than the woman who'd survived a murder attempt. He saw the scientist, the philanthropist, the artist, the woman who was learning to trust again. 2 years after David's conviction, Marcus and I got married in a small ceremony surrounded by real friends and family who celebrated our happiness without ulterior motives. The toast at our wedding didn't involve champagne. I developed an understandable aversion, but rather sake, in honor of the trip to Japan where I'd realized I could be happy again. As I looked around at the faces of people who genuinely loved me, I felt something I hadn't felt since before that terrible day: complete peace. The irony wasn't lost on me that David's attempt to take my life had actually given me a better one. His betrayal had burned away everything false, leaving only what was real and true and strong. The patent money that he'd coveted so desperately was now funding research that would save lives, supporting survivors rebuilding after trauma, and yes, giving me the comfortable life I'd earned through my own work. But more than that, his crime had forced me to see clearly, to value myself, to understand that I deserved better than someone who viewed me as an asset to be liquidated. I visited David in prison once, about 3 years into his sentence. I didn't tell Marcus, didn't want him to worry, but I needed closure that the trial hadn't provided. David had aged dramatically, his hair gray, face lined with bitterness and regret. When they brought him into the visiting room, he looked at me with something between hatred and longing. "Why did you come?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "I wanted to tell you that I forgive you," I said, watching his face register shock. "Not for you. You don't deserve my forgiveness. But for me, because carrying that anger was giving you power over me even from in here, and I'm done letting you take anything else from me." "I never meant," David started, but I held up my hand. "Yes, you did. You meant every part of it. You researched poisons, coup, you planned the timing, you bought the life insurance, you manipulated Sienna into helping you. You made a choice, David, a series of choices, actually. And now you're living with the consequences while I'm out there, living my best life. Your gambling debts are paid off. I made sure of that, not because I care about you, but because I didn't want your mistakes to hurt anyone else. The Foundation has already funded 3 major clinical trials and provided support to over 1,000 patients. And I'm married to someone who values my mind as much as my bank account, who celebrates my successes instead of resenting them, who would die before he hurt me." I stood up to leave. "I hope you think about that every day for the next 12 years until you're eligible for parole. I hope you think about everything you threw away because you were too proud to ask for help, too greedy to value what you had, too cowardly to face your problems honestly." David's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw genuine remorse, but I didn't stay to comfort him. I'd spent 12 years being his emotional support, his cheerleader, his partner. He'd repaid that by trying to murder me. I walked out of that prison and drove home to Marcus, who had dinner waiting and wanted to hear about my day at the Foundation. That night, curled up in bed in our home, filled with light and love and trust, I realized that David's poison had been a gift in disguise. Not the toxin itself, but what it revealed. About him, about me, about what I deserved and what I was capable of overcoming. He'd tried to end my story at chapter 12, but instead he'd just given me the plot twist that led to the best chapters of my life. The ones where I was the hero, not the victim. The ones where I used my power to heal instead of harm. The ones where I chose to build rather than destroy. And 5 years later, when I won the Nobel Prize for the cancer detection system I'd developed, the system that was saving thousands of lives annually, I didn't think about David at all during my acceptance speech. I thanked my team, my foundation partners Marcus and the patients whose struggles had inspired my work. I talked about perseverance and innovation and the responsibility we have to use our talents to make the world better. The press, of course, asked about the incident with my first husband, the attempted murder that had been front page news. And I smiled, a real smile, not the brittle one I'd worn during the trial, and said, that chapter of my life taught me that even our darkest moments can become the foundation for our greatest achievements. Someone once tried to take everything from me, but instead I found everything I was meant to be. That quote went viral, printed on inspirational posters, and shared across social media. People wrote to me about their own betrayals, their own survival stories, finding hope in my journey. The foundation's donations tripled, and somewhere in a medium security prison, David read about my Nobel Prize and finally understood the full magnitude of what he'd tried to destroy and how spectacularly he'd failed. Because in the end, that's the best revenge. Not making someone pay through suffering, but by succeeding so brilliantly that they become a forgotten footnote in your incredible story. David thought he could poison me and take my fortune. Instead, I turned his poison into medicine, his betrayal into purpose, and his evil intent into my greatest motivation. I didn't just survive, I thrived. And that glass of champagne he tried to use to end my life? It became a symbol of the toast I made to myself every day, to resilience, to justice, to the unbreakable human spirit that refuses to be destroyed by those who underestimate it. David paid for his crime with his freedom, his reputation, and his future. But I paid him back in a currency he never anticipated, by living so well that his attempt to end me became the beginning of my best life. And there's no revenge sweeter than that.